Okay, thank you very much. Well, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Vale Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Max Thompson and I'll be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being held at the office at Abbey House, Abingdon. Voting members are here in person as required, but officers and public speakers are able to join remotely if they wish through Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being streamed live on the Council's YouTube channel for public viewing. I have 5 housekeeping announcements. Firstly, for those joining remotely, when you're not speaking, please ensure your microphone is muted and your camera is off. If you share a presentation on the screen, please stop sharing as soon as it's no longer needed. Public speakers must only have their cameras on and be unmuted when addressing the committee and answering questions of clarification in their designated slots. Number 2 is evacuation procedure. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate the building by the nearest exit, which is in the corridor immediately to the right of the meeting room, and stand at assembly point 9. On arriving at the meeting, you should have read the emergency evacuation procedure and signed the fire register, so please inform Democratic Services if you have not done so. Mobile phones, please off or silent. Fourthly, members of the public who wish to leave the meeting after their application they're interested in has been discussed, you're very welcome to do so. Please, you can leave by the main entrance from which you came in, but please do so quietly. And fifth, when the meeting has ended, I'll ask for confirmation the live stream has ended. At that point, please make your way out the building, remembering to sign out as you leave. And just the final point, this is a meeting in public, not a public meeting. And I ask members of the public, both those attending here in person and those attending virtually, please ensure you do not shout out or disrupt the committee's deliberations outside of those who've registered to speak in their allocated slots. Excellent. Right, I now move on to apologies for absence. Emily Barry, do we have any apologies?
We have none, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And would you mind taking a roll call so everyone knows who's here?
Councillor Ron Batstone.
Present.
Councillor Cheryl Briggs. Present. Councillor Jenny Hannaby.
Present.
Councillor Scott Horton.
Present.
Councillor Robert Madison.
Present.
Councillor Mike Pickhills.
Yeah.
Councillor Jill Rayner. Present. Councillor Val Shaw. Present. Or Councillor Max Thompson.
Present. Thank you very much. I now turn to the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of August 2024. Can I have a motion? Well, firstly, do you consider them to be a correct record of the meeting? And secondly, can I have a motion to approve them? Councillor Hannaby, Rosa, and Councillor Batstone,
the approval, yeah.
And you'll second that? Perfect. So all those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? We have 4 of us who are abstaining because we weren't at the last meeting. Okay, perfect. So those are approved and I will sign those later. 4, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. For item 7, I'm a ward councillor, so I'll be stepping back from the table for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Shaw.
I'm the ward councillor for item 8, so again, I will be stepping down from that matter.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further? I just have a very quick one, just for maximum transparency. On reading the minutes, I noticed that on the first item we're discussing this evening, when it came to the meeting on the 21st of August, one of the speakers was Dr. Catherine Davies, who I have employed in the past as a heritage consultant. However, I've taken advice from Democratic, and I do not believe this in any way makes me prejudicial on this application, so I will not be standing down on this application. But just for maximum transparency, I thought I would declare it. Agenda item 5, urgent business. Is there any urgent business?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And public participation, I just want to confirm we have a number of speakers on both of the applications this evening. We also received a few statements on the first application, 16 Cumnor Hill, which have been circulated amongst the committee and have been read, and we may make reference to in the debate or in the questioning. And with that, I bring us to agenda item 7, 16 Cumnor Hill. Nat, I believe you're presenting on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much.
Right, thank you, Chair. So yes, this application was deferred from the last meeting of the planning committee for a site visit, which took place on Monday of this week. The application is referred to the committee at the request of the local member. The application seeks approval for the demolition of number 16 Cumnor Hill, a detached 1.5-storey dwelling, and the erection of 2 dwellings, one in the front of the site in the approximate position of the existing house and the second to the rear. Following last committee meeting, there have been some concerns raised regarding parts of the presentation, so I just want to clarify some matters. This map shows the application site in yellow and the parish of Cumnor in blue. The parish boundary corresponds to the area of the Cumnor neighbourhood plan. Therefore, to be clear and for the avoidance of doubt, the application site is in the parish of Cumnor and the policies of the neighbourhood plan hold full weight. The report for this application and my presentation last week referred to the site being within Botley for the purposes of local plan policy CP3 and 4. Extracts from these policies are shown here. Note that CP3 defines Botley as a local service centre and Cumnor as a larger village. The supporting text of the policy states that the settlement boundaries for the local service centres and market towns will be shown on the policies map, but that no such boundary will be defined for Botley, as the Oxford Greenbelt already serves to define the settlement. Note, in both local service centres and larger villages, there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development given by policy CP4. So this is the policies map which accompanies the local plan, and it shows this is for the Abingdon and Oxford fringe sub area of the local plan. So as you can see, the green line denotes the Greenbelt boundary, and that's around the single settlement noted as Botley on the map. And then on the second image, a closer up image, the site is shown in red beside the name Botley. Therefore, officers consider for the purposes of CP3 and 4, the site forms part of Botley. However, as explained, this does not change the fact that the site is within the parish of Cumnor, and the policies of the Cumnor neighbourhood plan hold full weight, and hence the report considers the proposals in detail against the policies of this plan. So for clarity, extracts of the neighbourhood plan policies are shown. Please note that policy DBC1, which applies to the whole of the parish of Cumnor, states that backland development shall be avoided where it undermines the strong character formed by common plot shapes, sizes, orientations, and building to plot ratios, rather than a blanket prevention of backland development. Development must be assessed for its impacts on these factors. Please also note policies DBC3 and 5, which apply to the application site, as it is within these designated areas of the neighbourhood plan. There's also been concerns raised regarding the risk of groundwater flooding at the site. So again, to be clear, this is the map 15 from the neighbourhood plan, which shows the groundwater flood risk zones shown in the blue and green shading on the map. And again, the application site is shown on the right outside of these areas. This is the application site, location plan, of the application. As previously explained, the site is within areas designated by the neighbourhood plan as being low density and an area of special local character. To the north of the dwellings in Martin's Close. To the east are 2 buildings containing 15 flats with car parking in the rear of the site. To the south is Cumnor Hill, from which vehicular access to the site is gained. To the west is an access road serving numbers 18A and B, which are to the northwest. Beyond the access road is a detached dwelling. It's not that clear, but there's a topological plan of the site, which shows a slope down from Cumnor Hill to the rear of the site. This is the existing elevations of the dwelling, which is to be demolished, showing its 1.5-storey design. So this is the proposed site plan showing the positions of the 2 dwellings. The dwelling to the front of the site is shifted slightly closer to Cumnor Hill. The new dwelling to the rear is beside the car parking serving the flats to the east and slightly beyond the rear elevation of the easternmost building of the flats. Each dwelling has parking to the front with a garage serving the rear dwelling. The rear dwelling will be accessed by a new access road which runs between the new dwelling to the front and the flats to the east. As the rear dwelling will be built behind the existing frontage along Cumnor Hill, it represents backland development. The elevations of House 1, erected at the front of the site, is shown with its 2-storey height, but with rooms in the roof. And these are the elevations of House 2, erected in the rear of the site, with a similar appearance and scale to House 1, but with slight variations to the elevations. This is a section plan, again showing the slope through the site and the positions of the dwellings in respect of that. And note the lower position of the dwelling to the rear. So this is the garage serving the rearmost dwelling and the bin and cycle stores. The location of the bin stores is shown on the plans, but there's no such location for the cycle stores, and hence the condition is recommended requiring details of this. As members have been to the site, I will briefly go through some of the main photos of the site. The Cumnor Parish Council and several residents have objected to this application. Officers consider that the main areas of objection are the impacts of the development on the character of the area and the compliance with neighbourhood plan policies, the impact on neighbours' amenity, and the impacts in terms of flood risk and the suitability of the drainage proposals. Development is backland development, which policy DBC1 of the neighbourhood plan seeks to prevent, where this undermines the strong character formed by common plot shapes, sizes, orientation, and building to plot ratios. The site is also within a low density area identified by policy DBC3 and an area of special local character identified by policy DBC5. For the reasons outlined in the report, the specific context of this site, with existing backland development to the north and northwest, its position set down from Cumnor Hill, the distance which will remain between the two dwellings and their neighbours, and the building to plot ratio being comparable to surrounding properties are considered to ensure the development does not harm local character nor conflict with neighbourhood plan policies. Regarding amenity, the distances between the two dwellings and neighbouring properties are considered sufficient to prevent significant harm to amenity, even considering the relative land levels between the site and those neighbours to the north. In respect of flooding and drainage, the site is essentially impermeable and hence infiltration for surface water is not feasible. The slope down the site from Cumnor Hill also means that gravity cannot be relied upon to transport surface and foul water to public sewers at the top of the site. To overcome this and to ensure that flood risk is not increased, it is proposed that surface and foul water be pumped up the hill. The council's drainage engineer is satisfied that this is acceptable in this instance and that the system has sufficient capacity to deal with flooding and failure of the pumps without increasing the risk of flooding to other properties. As subject to the recommended conditions, officers consider that the development would not be harmful, and in the absence of objections from technical consultees, it is held that the application accords with the policies of the development plan and the MPPF, and therefore it is recommended that planning permission be granted.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll hear from our speakers and then we'll return to some questions. So we have 4 speakers on this application this evening. The first is Councillor Lawrence Waters, the representative of Cumnor Parish Council. So Councillor Waters, are you here? Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. You'll have 3 minutes when you're ready, and you'll be given a 30-second warning when there's 30 seconds left, and that will commence when you start speaking. So thank you so much.
Fine. Start, I'm assuming that all the members of the planning committee have received and read the detailed statement submitted previously by Dr. Catherine Davis and Richard Whitlock regarding the planning application. Both are local residents and former senior planning officers of great experience. I'm not sure that was the case at the last meeting. The planning officer considers development to be outside of the groundwater flooding risk zone from the MPB flood risk assessment. On map 15 of the MPB, it is clearly shown in the green-blue shaded potential groundwater flooding zone. Hence the requirement to dig a 65,000 litre holding tank with electric pumps in the garden of House 2 is contrary to Neighbourhood Plan Flood Risk Policy RNE2. No details are provided on the impact of that on immediately adjacent dwellings in Martin's Close, which are at an elevation of 1 to 3 metres below the lowest point of the proposed site. What happens to groundwater levels when this is dug out, or if this holding tank leaks or the pump fails? Those of you on Cumnor Hill on Monday would have seen that the storm drains were overflowing due to the rain nearly outside this development. This is the planning officer stated he considers the development is situated in partly well. He's agreed now that it's in Cumnor, because the planning department, who could consider the development to be in Cumnor, as a planning application was sent to Cumnor Parish Council for consideration and not to the Botley North Hinksey Parish Council. This is especially important for this site. It sits in the Lower Cumnor Hill Third Acre Rise area of special local character, a designation recognised by Historic England to capture historically important areas, and so within the remit of Cumnor Neighbourhood Plan Policy DBC 5. This application does not conform to Policy DBC 5. Lastly, the planning officer in paragraphs 7.8 acknowledges that the development will represent backland development, but then argues that the specific context of the site means the application accords with Policy DBC 1. However, this is clearly contrary to the Cumnor Neighbourhood Plan Policy DBC 1 of avoiding a backland development by maintaining building to plot ratios and maintaining common 1 and 2 story character, particularly so on this steeply sloping site with overlooking of properties in Martin Close.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Councillor Waters. I'll ask our members of the committee if they've got any questions or clarification. Any further questions? Like I said, thank you very much for your time here. And I'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Professor Nicholas Perkins. Professor Perkins.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And as with everyone, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking, and there'll be a 30-second.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to put my own time on if that's okay as well.
That's absolutely
to make sure. Everyone. Great, thank you very much. I'm speaking on behalf of 5 households at 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 Martin Close. We object very strongly to this proposal. Point 1. These mansion-style houses would damage the street scene of Lower Cumnor Hill, contrary to the Cumnor Neighbourhood Plan Policy DBC 5, where proposals should respond positively to its designated area, an area of special local character, including, quote, the relationship between houses and gardens, the topography of the area and its open spaces. Point 2. House number 2 is backland development, as we've heard, directly contrary to Policy DBC 1, which states that developments should maintain the strong character of the local area by, quote, avoiding backland development that will undermine this character. Point 3. Policy DBC 1 states proposals should maintain the 1 and 2 story character of the area. Now, these large houses with 3rd floor bedrooms are not 2-story in nature, the roofs having to be steeper to accommodate those bedrooms. They're extraordinarily insensitive, running counter to Policy DBC 3. The joint design guide applies here, but has been ignored. The proposal also contravenes core policy 37 of the local plan 2031, which requires proposals to respond positively to the site and its surroundings. Point 4. The planning officer's report mentions 18 Cumnor Hill. Now, that development broke planning rules, ignored a cease and desist letter from the council, and was only granted retrospective permission after the authorities failed to enforce their own rulings. Since then, the neighbourhood plan has been adopted, and one of its main drivers was precisely to avoid that kind of damaging development. A proposed similar backland development behind 20 Cumnor Hill was refused, the inspector noting that it would damage the spacious character of Cumnor Hill. Under Policy DBC 1, proposals should, quote, ensure that balconies and raised patios do not reduce the amenity or privacy of neighbours. Now, House 2's patio and upper stories will damage that amenity. As I understand it, its ground floor will be at the same level as my bedroom windows, and then it goes up 3 stories. Now, that's going to cause significant harm. Now, I don't have time to address all the other issues about drainage, flooding, the obvious problems of pumping sewage to Cumnor Hill, biodiversity loss, or that the plans are based on an incorrect boundary line with Martin Close, meaning that House 2 is even closer to the property boundary than claimed. But to summarise, this application is wholly inappropriate for this designated area of special local character. It runs counter to planning policies at national and local level and should be rejected. So let's instead have a plan for the site, a bit like what ended up in 20 Cumnor Hill, a more sensible plan, which recognises its context and actually meets some of the real housing needs of the area, which is not for 2 mansions. Thank you.
So thank you much, Professor Perkins. Are there any questions for you? I guess for someone. So you mentioned that the boundary line's even closer. Could you elaborate on that slightly?
Yeah, that's because sorry, that was my timer. That's because there's a fence line at the back of the gardens in Martin Close, which isn't accurate to the actual property boundary. And so the developers have, in a way, quite reasonably taken the fence line, but it is, it's well known that there's between 1 and 2 meters more Martin Close Gardens than the fence shows.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. So just so I'm clear, the fence line at the back,
Yeah,
we're saying that the plot doesn't go all the way to the fence line.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
so sorry, I'm afraid I can only.
Yeah,
direct
that's right.
questions.
So, well, I sent in a written thing before
Sure,
the August meeting, and I sort of showed that the actual, I just downloaded it from my, the like the registry property. There's a straight line, whereas on the plans here it kind of does a little wiggle, and that's not accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? Sorry, Councillor Rainey.
Yeah.
That's all right.
You said that the ground floor of the new development is on par or looking into your bedroom.
That's what I understand the level of it. So, I mean, I understand that you've been for a site visit.
Yeah.
I hope you managed to go to Martin Close and have a look from the bottom of the hill facing upwards. It's quite a steep hill. We all know how the hill is. And so that house, especially if it's built out from the hill, is going to go up and up and up, compared to the houses at Martin Close, which are kind of more tucked in, and they're very much low level, 2-story houses. I mean, I took that from, I think, something that came out of the previous meeting, and it is in the Cumnor Parish response. It talks about, I think, 13 metres, that house number 2 will go up compared to the Martin Close houses. But the specifics are in the Cumnor Parish response to the application.
Thank you. Any further questions? I just want to say thank you very much for your time this evening. I now turn to our next speaker, David Burson. So, well, good evening, David. Good evening to Mr. Burson. Sorry, apologies. As with everyone else, you have 3 minutes and you'll get a warning when you've got 30 seconds left. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try to keep this brief because your officer's given a very good summation of the policy and the site position already. Firstly, it's nice to have the opportunity to thank members for braving the weather for a site visit on Monday. I'm sure it was useful to you all and provided a better understanding of the site, and I'd hope that this, along with the daylight assessment that's been supplied since the last meeting and verifies your officer's conclusion that the development won't be harmful in terms of overshadowing, allows you to endorse their recommendation. On-site, councillors will have also seen separation from neighbouring properties, and hopefully that also helps you appreciate your officer's conclusion that it's aligned with your design guide standards and, in their professional opinion, won't cause harmful overlooking. One point I just want to address is the status of backland development in the development plan. We obviously concur with your officer's conclusion that the development complies with all relevant policies. It's important to stress, though, that the DEC1 doesn't preclude backland development in the area. It only precludes that which is considered harmful. This is logical because the neighbourhood plan must be consistent with the local plan policies, including those that encourage the efficient use of land in locations that are sustainable, such as Cumnor Hill. Were there a moratorium on backland development, it would prejudice sustainable development and be inconsistent with the local plan. The policy, as it's been applied by your officer, allows a balancing of considerations, the purpose we have, the planning system and applications. In this case, the site's in an area where backland development is very much part of the established character. It is distinctly different, for example, from that further to the west on Cumnor Hill, where development has a far more regimented arrangement, where there are no backland homes and where a scheme might be considered intrusive. Although the neighbourhood plan places Cumnor Hill in a single broad character area, the road isn't uniform and the planning application demands a refined approach that your officer has applied. It's also important to note that while some of the nearby backland developments do predate the neighbourhood plan, it doesn't detract from the fact that they exist and they form part of the area's character. Furthermore, although there was no neighbourhood plan when they were permitted, they still had to pass the council's stringent local plan policies for protecting character areas. We firmly believe the proposed development to be a character of the area and to comply with all development plan policies, including those in the neighbourhood plan. We agree with your officer's assessment that development will not harm local amenity, including with regard to overshadowing, overlooking and general character. With a recent site visit, we believe the council's diligently discharged its duty to fully consider the proposal's impacts and hope the committee are now in a position to support their officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Burson? I guess I just have a question about the laurel hedge at the end of the garden. So there's no boundary treatment proposed as part of this application. What is the intention with that laurel hedge that's going? This is quite a large laurel hedge that goes quite far back. But I guess the concern would be if the laurel hedge was removed, it would have a much greater impact on the neighbours in Martin's Close. So is there anything proposed to happen to that laurel hedge?
Not so far as I'm aware. I believe the developers are keen to maintain features on the site. The officer will be able to answer in terms of the consideration they have given it. But my recollection is that there's not a condition requiring its retention. But well, that's something that you can't necessarily. That's obviously something that could be debated and considered by the committee.
I will turn to our officer once we've heard from you. Councillor Pickles.
So there's been a deal of discussion about the slope and about the kind of flooding risk and how you've dealt with it by providing a holding tank and electric pump too. How are the residents going to be assured that that pump and that system will be maintained going forward and actually remain operational?
There will be a duty, I think, on the householder to maintain it, and they have a vested interest in maintaining it, because ultimately if there are problems they will be the first to suffer them. But the proposals have all been considered by your drainage officer, who is certainly diligent in his considerations, and he's content that there's not just a pump. There are safeguards there in terms of a tank to retain the ability to failure. I believe as well there is a secondary punch of the primary pump fail, so it would need something quite remarkable, I think, for there to be a problem. But again, that's something which the council could consider controls on, but it is one there is fundamentally a vested interest in whoever has that pump and keeping it going, because it's for their benefit as well as those around them.
Councillor Halliday.
Yes, I was saying, did you have any consultation with the neighbours or the surrounding neighbours when you were putting the development plan together?
I'm afraid I'm not in a position to answer that. My colleague led on the proposal. They are in the habit of reaching out, but I wouldn't want to answer speculatively.
But it sounds as though no. But it's just a comment of one of the owners of the houses at the end of the garden that said about a development could be acceptable. That's all. It's just that remark that I picked up from the first time.
No, I think you got the answer to your question.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you to answer.
Yeah.
Are there any further questions for Mr. Person? I can't see any, so thank you very much for your time this evening. I now call upon our final speakers on this application, Councillor Scott Portman and Councillor Judy Roberts. You have 3 minutes between you, and you can use them however you wish, but there will similarly be a 30-second warning at the end. So I'll let you bring up another chair. Thank you so much for joining us. When you're ready.
Thank you, committee, for allowing me to speak to you tonight. This is a matter of balanced judgment as to the harm of backland development. But this area has met a checkered history with the Planning Inspectorate. At number 20, an eco-bungalow was refused in 2016, stating that it was out of character with the local area and would cause harm to the living conditions in Rose Gardens and Martin Close. At 12 to 14 in 2017, it was out of character with the local area, adding the houses at 18A and B were a continuation of Martin's Close, as they were in the Ensham Road part of their site. In May 21, we adopted our local neighbourhood plan, and the big survey in that found a need for 1 to 3 bedroom properties. We have plenty of 4 and 5. In the refusal of 134 Cumnor Hill, the reasons given were backland development and conflicts with DCB 1, DCB 3 and DCB 5, CP 37 of the local plan and the MPPF. All these applications were for backland development. This application contains a seriously sloped section of driveway that for 40 foot is 200 centimetres wider than a fire appliance. It has not got finished floor levels in the plan anywhere, so you can see that it's sloping, but you have no idea where the levels are going to be when the build is finished. And that you need to be able to judge from the topology how much they have to flatten it to accommodate the dwellings. Without FFLs, we cannot enforce the plan as the finished build. A very wide and high hedge at the rear of the property site makes the sunlight assessment acceptable for Martin's Close, but can only be conditioned for 5 years if it survives the build or a subsequent purchase, sir. For me, the refusal plan has just too much in it for this application to be found acceptable. Thank you.
I've only one very small thing to add, which is I'm holding here the copy of the planning inspector's report from number 20 Camden Hill, where they rejected it based on the character. One of the other policies they actually state that it does not meet is local plan policy CP4, which is being stated as that this current application does meet, as well as the fact that, you know, at number 20, they're saying, in contrast, the appeal proposal would be cited amongst properties at Camden Hill where a spacious character prevails. Irrespective of the applicant's low density figure, the proposal will result in number 20, in this case, the garden being considerably shorter than adjoining gardens of Camden Hill, despite the traditional design reform chosen. Fundamentally, we've got planning inspector reports here, and that's 12 and 14, which were dismissed when appealed to the planning inspector.
Thank you very much for your time this evening. I'll ask members of the committee if we've got any questions for you. Okay, apologies, I have one, but I'll be quick. So I just want to be clear from what you've said, particularly Councillor Roberts, is that I understand that you would prefer that we do not approve this application, but were we minded to approve it, I get from what you've said that you are very keen that we have FFLs insisted, so ensuring the levels and the heights are there in place, a condition on that. And although you acknowledge that a boundary treatment condition can only be enforced for 5 years, would you still prefer, were we minded to approve this, that we had a condition to that effect?
I would definitely want FFLs, yep, because I got involved with this site originally when a digger was nearly falling into one of the residents' gardens because they had to bring in a large number of HGVs full of topsoil to be able to make the land flat for them to be able to build. And it was so high, the digger was almost falling off into the adjacent garden as they built it. When we tried to enforce this as not being according to the plans, the enforcement officer, and then the finding was that we couldn't do that because, one, we didn't have a topology on that particular occasion, and two, we had no finished floors levels on the build. We did in the end get finished floor levels on the garden, and we couldn't, you know, that was actually enforced at that point. But yes, I wouldn't do that. The hedge definitely, but as I said, I've seen several builds where hedges haven't survived the build, and two, whilst you can then condition it for 5 years, you also cannot condition it about the property being sold on and a subsequent purchaser completely ignoring anything that's previously there.
Thank you, I understand. Any further questions? In which to say thank you very much for your time this evening. And now I turn to the committee to any questions of our officer. Does anyone have any questions for Nat Ramsey? Maybe they will ask last time, but anyway, any further questions?
Could you go over the levels, the floor levels that we don't seem to have?
Well, so we have a section drawing, which will form part of the approved plans. But if committee were concerned about the finished floor levels and there potentially being discrepancy, you could impose a condition that requires details of the finished floor levels. You can even have details of levels of garden, etc. And that would be against a reference point. So that would allow enforcement to be able to say definitively what level it should have been built at. Obviously, in my opinion, the section plan is sufficiently clear, but if you were concerned about that, that is a condition that could be additionally imposed, requiring them to submit details of the finished floor levels.
And I believe our officers are content with, well, I can see that there's no objections from our officers.
No.
So that's a quick answer rather than me going into it elongated each one. Thank you.
Any further questions for our officer? Councillor Pickles.
So, probably back to the original meeting. The thing most troubled me about this application is particularly the height of the house at the bottom of the hill. It's a tall house, 2.5 stories, and when you stand on Martin's Close and look back up, I went on a separate visit because I could make the one on Monday. it does really worry me because it's going to be very, very high. And I actually do agree that it's out of character with the area, because it's almost like you have to view this site with two ends to it. So the Cumnor Hill end and the Martin Close end. And it does, I think it will look out of place and be out of character. So can you just kind of go through why you're so certain that it is going to be in keeping and in character?
So I think the immediate context of this site, you've got the dwellings of Martin Close to the north, which are obviously existing backland development. And you've got numbers 18A and B, just slightly off, which are again backland development. And then you've got a garage to the front of number 18A or B, I'm not sure which. And then the flats to the east. This building will only be slightly further back in the site than the easternmost flat.
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, when you're stood to the rear of the existing house, there's an existing character of backland development on most sides, and that therefore, in my opinion, a new dwelling in that position will not appear unduly out of keeping or out of character, or it's not. So, for instance, like, it's not that you're stood in a row of completely unbroken rear gardens with nothing beyond it, where a new house would all of a sudden, appear and have no buildings in its context. Whereas I think that's not the case here. I feel like it would be seen within the context of the existing buildings surrounding it, and hence wouldn't appear overly, prominent or out of keeping with its surroundings.
Any further questions for our officer before we move into debate? Councillor Pickles.
The kind of tank and the pump and everything, do you think there could be a condition to ensure there was a maintenance regime in place for that?
Yeah, so at the moment the condition is a compliance condition requiring them to install it in accordance with what they've submitted. That could be, the wording of that could be changed such that there's a maintenance schedule that could be submitted as part. It would probably be prior to, would it have to be prior to commencement, do you think? Prior to commencement, we could ask for a maintenance schedule.
Because we have done this on other sites where there's these kinds of solutions in place.
Yeah, that's something that could be added to that question.
Okay, any further questions?
Sorry,
just please.
I asked mine the first time.
So the issue about the fence, can you just explain whether that makes any difference to our understanding?
So the laurel hedge is a huge hedge, I think at least 3 meters. We wouldn't condition that to be retained. A, because of its extreme height, we would never want a hedge that high on someone's boundary. B, it's obviously not a native species. And C, in terms of so essentially when assessing the impacts in terms of dominance and overlooking, I've essentially treated it as if that wasn't there. So in my opinion, without that hedge, the distances are sufficient to prevent significant harm, even without that hedge there. Because you can't, I don't think it's appropriate to rely on a living thing to stop, because obviously the lifetime of this development, that laurel hedge could die. And if the impact of overlooking was only acceptable because that hedge is there, you shouldn't rely on it. So in my opinion, removing the hedge, as if it wasn't there, it still isn't significantly harmful. Now, if members were worried, there is conditions you can impose in terms of boundary treatments. So in terms of, you could request a higher boundary on the rear, but then obviously you've got to then balance that in terms of the impact on that neighbour just from dominance from the fence itself. And that's why I haven't recommended any specific condition about that, because in my opinion, even without relying on the hedge, the impacts are acceptable.
Councillor Wren.
Carrying on from Councillor Bill's point there, the laurel hedges after the visit is absolutely huge. I was just wondering, would there be any way of having a condition where we would look at mature landscaping rather than the fencing, which might make it more acceptable from the Martin's Close side? Is there a condition?
Yeah, you can require. So we do. I believe there is a landscaping condition, but it's not specific to a rear boundary So, but you can condition it. Obviously, the issue you have with that is, yes, we could condition something to be a certain height, and then it's there and it works, and then it dies, and then we obviously would then say, well, replace it. But in the meantime, the harm then, if you think without that it's harmful, the harm then occurs for potentially years until it's up to it's the height that you need. So I would be wary of using, like I say, a living thing to prevent a harm.
Wondering if we're minded to approve if that could be done in consultation with the Martins Close residents to see if that's something that will make it more acceptable. It's
unfortunately, Councillor Rain, we wouldn't do that sort of in consultation. So the condition would need to be worded as you, as a committee, felt appropriate. And that is how we would control it. Unfortunately, we don't. No, and we don't have the mechanism of consultation with conditions.
Thank you.
Okay, any further? Councillor?
Going on to that, keep on that note. So we're not going to touch that at all. They can take it out as well.
It could be removed tomorrow.
So they could, in fact, put a fence up there anyway.
So yes, the permit development would allow a 2 metre high fence from the ground level nearest to the fence.
Okay, any final questions, or shall we move into debate? Okay, well, let's move into debate, but to move into debate, I need a motion on this application. So would someone like to put forward a motion? Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I didn't make it to the site visit. It's a little bit by now, but I did drive down the road and have a look on the outside. I will propose, as I did last time, that we reject this application. The primary reason I'll give for this is the same as at the previous meeting, which is mainly the issue of backland development. So we've heard that the special character of the area is enshrined in policy in the neighbourhood plan. And part of that special character is the low density of buildings in the area. Putting 2 buildings on this plot, I believe, would represent harm, cause it goes against the idea of low density. Secondly, we've got the backland development thing in and of itself. That's in there as a whole policy, DBC 1. I remember. I accept that there is a qualifier in the policy saying where it does no harm. So there is a balance to be found there. But for me, the intent of that policy in the neighbourhood plan is very clear. As in, backland development, I think, is only being looked for where it's very obvious it does no harm. And here I think it does, as I've mentioned already. Final point I make is not strictly a planning matter exactly, but we had an awful lot of local residents here tonight speaking against this application. I would say more than we usually might expect for an application like this, which I think further illustrates the feeling in the local community that they just don't want to see backland development like this on the plot. And as I mentioned, I think that's enshrined in the neighbourhood plan as well. So for me, I think there's actually a very clear and obvious one that the application should be rejected.
Okay, can I have a seconder for that, and then we'll expand the debate. Would you like to add anything at this point?
No, I mean, I kind of, I'm quite troubled by this application because of the particularly because of the slope and the height of the buildings, and I agree with the point that about the fact that this is likely to do harm to the area, particularly Martins Close.
Okay, I'm going to open up the floor to debates on this. So I'll start. I have a comment on this. So actually, I both agree and disagree with you, Councillor Madsen. So for me, I don't think this is an obvious one. And I did go on the site visit, and I understand why our officer has reached the conclusion that has been reached in the report. That said, I do agree that it does harm, and I think that it needs to be a very high bar to allow backland development given the neighbourhood plan. And I think it would be overly cramped. I don't think it accords with the plot shapes and the sizes as we saw there. So I will be supporting your motion, even if I slightly disagree that it's a clear-cut case. But I think, no, sorry, apologies. I didn't mean to mischaracterize it. But I think it does harm on that ground. I'm also very concerned about the levels. I think the levels is a big concern I have looking at the site. And so that's sort of my grounding on this, but I will be supporting your motion. So I will be supporting the motion to refuse. Anything further? Councillor Babstone.
Yes, I think I tend to agree with the officers. I mean, my feeling on the site visit was that it is a fairly well developed environment, and that a second house wouldn't materially make that any worse than it is at the moment. There were a few buildings around there that I wouldn't have wanted in the first place, but I mean they exist and they're there, and it is a site that is very close to Botley, and I do see that in a sense it is part of the Botley environment, as it were. So I think with no technical objections to the site, my feeling is to agree with the officers that it wouldn't be overdeveloped.
Well, I had quite a lot to say the first time round, and my feelings were to support the officer's recommendation. I'm sorry I couldn't get to the site, but it was rather
It was a very rainy day.
Well, and not only that, I had a lot of emergencies around my area as a councillor, but I do know that area, having built on there myself years ago. But all in all, we have no objections from our officer. We have thoroughly gone through the local plans and etc. And we've gone through again, and thank you for that. I think that really clarified. I would have preferred consultation. That's why I asked the question. I always think if it's better to have it. We've already heard from a resident that will be affected, that a better development, in his words, could have gone on there. So that says to me that perhaps some development could go on that large block. So all in all, I'm going to stick how I felt initially, and I will support the officer's recommendation.
Okay. Further debate on this application? Okay, so we're going to take a vote on this motion. We have a motion in place. Yes, just to clarify, yes, please.
So listening to the debate and discussion, we have the original motion, which is having regard to the low density character of area. There's concern about harm due to the level of development, and also given the backland nature that's harmful to the character of the area. In addition, I've heard from councillors concerns about the level changes, so topography across the site, and also its cramped nature. Would you like that to form part of the refusal reason as well? Yeah. Okay, so then we're looking at a refusal on basis of policies CP37, DP23, and the neighbourhood plan policies DBC1, DBC3 and DBC5, which will relate to all those concerns you've raised. Okay.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much. So all those in favour of this motion to refuse? Those against? Any abstentions? That motion passes. Thank you very much. We're now, I'll just allow people to make their way out, and then we will move on to the second item we have this evening, which Nat, I believe you're also presenting on, which is Little Orchard, Lamborough Hill. Yes, just please do get some information.
Well, then those flats should have been built on.
There was no plan. Well, that's the one.
Right, shall we move on to, I remind us that we're still live streaming, so I'm going to ask that we move on to the second item. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, can I point out that a superseded plan has erroneously been included within the agenda pack, or appendix 2 to the agenda. A roof plan showing the semi-detached house, drawing 105A, that's being superseded, so please disregard that plan. And I also wanted to point out that the planning history in the committee report refers solely to the neighbouring site and not the site itself. So all of the planning history is for next door, not the actual site itself, but it is still relevant. So this application is referred to planning committee at the request of the local member, Councillor Balshaw. The application seeks approval for the demolition of the existing bungalow on site and the erection of 2 detached 2-storey houses, one with 4 bedrooms and the other with 3. The application site is Little Orchard in the village of Wootton. The site location plan is shown. The site is close to the bystander pub junction in the centre of the village. To the north of the site is a development of 3 new dwellings nearing completion, also owned by the applicant. To the east and south are other residential properties, whilst Lamborough Hill is to the west, from which vehicular access is gained. Proposed site plan shows the 2 new dwelling and the parking and turning area to the front. The dwellings are sited closer to the road than the existing bungalow and are more parallel with it. The existing vehicular access is proposed to be improved, given its use will be intensified. The elevation plan of the 3-bed dwelling is shown. This is the dwelling to be erected in the southern part of the site. Note its design and scale are similar to the dwellings nearing completion to the north. This is the elevations of the 4-bed dwelling erected in the northern part, closest to those new dwellings. This is the floor plan of the 3-bed, 4-bed. And this is the street scene drawing showing the new dwellings in the context of those that are nearing completion. Note their similar scale and appearance. So these are some site photos. The first site photos were taken some time ago when the houses were at a less advanced stage, but my later photos are from today, so you'll be able to see those. So this is looking towards the neighbouring dwelling in Home Close. So this is towards the existing bungalow, which you can just about make out above the hedge. So this is looking along Home Close to the east, showing the predominant 1 and 1.5 story character. This is the immediate neighbour to the east. And this is looking across their garden, and you can just about see the existing bungalow in the background. So this is stood at the access, the existing vehicular access, looking towards the bystander junction, and then down Lamborough Hill. So these photos were taken today, so you can see that the houses next door are almost finished, and that the proposed dwellings before you today will be more parallel to the rear of these dwellings, whereas you can see the existing bungalows twisted away from them. And again, this is in Lamborough Hill, looking towards the site, and the new dwellings can be seen, and that obviously the proposed dwellings will be to the east of these, to the side of these, sorry, with a similar scale and appearance. So officers consider that the most important considerations when assessing this application is its impact on the character of the area, neighbour amenity and highway safety. For the reasons outlined in the report, following the amendments to reduce the number of dwellings proposed and subject to the recommended conditions, officers consider that the development would be unharmful and in accordance with the development plan, and hence it is recommended that permission be granted.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll return to you once we've heard from our speakers on this application. We have 2 speakers on this application. The first is Hugh Mellor, who I believe is speaking in favour. Mr. Mellor, sorry, I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did.
Excellent, very good. Well, as with everyone else, you have 3 minutes and you'll get a 30-second warning, so please begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for your time. This proposal has been through a relatively long process of both pre-application and post-application revision in full discussion with your officers to get to the point now where we have a scheme before you tonight, which is recommended for approval. And probably the long and short of the whole process comes down to the fact that the original scheme for the site was comprised of 3 dwellings, and now we've reduced the scheme down to 2 dwellings only. And that's meant we've been able to produce a scheme now that meets squarely all of the relevant policies in relation to new residential development. The two houses, they're of a size that readily meets both of your minimum internal floor space requirements and the external garden size requirements. Car parking is provided on the plot to full parking standards. And as your officer report runs through in full detail, the design and the siting and the size of each of the houses, they ensure they are not in any way neighbourly. And in overall design terms, they're traditional in appearance to match the prevailing general vernacular built character of this part of the village, and they readily fit in with them. There's no objections from any of these statutory professional consultees. There's none from highways, there's none from drainage, there's none from waste management, and there's none from your environmental protection team. There are no technical professional consultees in terms of objection at all. I think it's a very straightforward application, I have to say, and there really isn't very much more for me to say. Your officers are making an unequivocal and very clear recommendation of approval to you across all planning considerations, and I very much hope you will follow their clear advice and recommendation to you and grant the planning permission that you're being invited to approve this evening. So thank you very much for your time. If you do have any questions, then please fire away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mellor. I'll ask the committee if we've got any questions, clarification, please. Can't see any, so I'll say thank you very much for your time this evening.
Yeah, thank you.
And I now call upon our second speaker on this application, Councillor Marshall. Excellent. Welcome, Councillor Shaw. You have 3 minutes when you're ready, and you'll get a 30-second warning.
Thank you. I'll probably need it. I start by saying that neither I nor Wootton Parish Council have any concerns about development on what I consider actually to be quite a small site. Where we both have concerns is in relation to the construction period of this development. Poplar Corner, the site next door to the north, is being developed by the same applicant. As well as a somewhat turbulent planning history relating to Poplar Corner, the work in developing the site has caused much distress to local residents. We all know that building work can be noisy and dusty, but there's usually respite at the weekends. Deliveries of material for the work at Poplar Corner have frequently blocked the road to Wootton Village and Old Lords Hill, and the constant weekend working both Saturdays and Sundays has given rise to complaints to the parish councils from those living nearby. Whilst there is no working hours restriction in place for Poplar Corner, I would ask that in relation to Little Orchard, there should be a condition limiting weekend working to Saturday mornings only. I'm aware that conditions imposed have to be reasonable. I would argue that to impose such a condition in this case would be both reasonable and justifiable. Local residents have had to put up with their Saturdays and Sundays being disturbed by building noise from the adjacent site for more than 2 years. And it would be unreasonable to ask them to tolerate probably another 12 to 18 months of disturbance. In relation to there is a construction traffic management plan in place. Little Orchard also meets such a plan. The site is on the B4017, which, as those of you who attended the site visit on Monday will have seen, is very busy, being the main road between Abingdon, Cumnor and Oxford. Delivery times should be limited to avoid conflicting with the morning and evening rush hours and children walking to and from the local primary school in Wootton Village. So far as possible, parking during construction should be on site. I say again that the B4017 along Lamborough Hill is a very busy road, and on-street parking so close to a busy junction would cause a good deal of disruption. 30 seconds. I agree with our officer that the net increase of one dwelling on the Little Orchard site will not add significantly to the volume of traffic overall. However, as paragraph 7.3, he contends that occupiers of the houses will not be reliant on cars. there is an hourly bus service, but as people found out very quickly, in the mornings particularly, one bus is too early for kids going to school, the other one is too late. So they either have to go on bikes or parents drive them.
Sure, that's just over 3 minutes, so I'm going to have to stop you there, but thank you so much. I'll ask members of the committee if they've got any questions for you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, you say there's issues with the working on site on the previous site on weekends. Has that been primarily an issue of the work itself or primarily an issue of deliveries or both?
I understand that it's the working on site, not deliveries.
Any further questions? I think I'll just ask a question of clarification when it comes to the conditions that where we might approve this for us to impose. So you mentioned that you know, we should consider whether it's reasonable for development to take place on a Sunday and a Saturday afternoon. So would you be proposing, what specific hours do you think would be the most reasonable for us to impose where we minded to?
The sort of hours that normally go with larger developments, up till lunchtime on a Saturday, and the normal times during the week, but nothing on bank holidays.
Excellent. I shall take some advice from officers on that in the next part of the discussion. Any further questions? I can't see any, so I'll say thank you very much for joining us this evening. And now I ask members of the committee if you've got any questions for our officer.
I believe we can put some conditions on working, and what a shame that that someone in there didn't get in touch with environment or enforcement. I'm sure something could have been done earlier.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
Just a question for the officer. I know on the application, and it's been commented on by one of the neighbours. On the plans, it's saying existing beach hedge retained if possible. We've then, I think, we're recommending a condition on definitely retaining that hedge. Is that correct?
Yeah, because there's a very strong character formed by that hedge, which would be significantly harmed if that was to be ripped out. So yes, we're seeking to retain that by condition.
That's fine. I just saw the if possible was a concern.
I have a quick question on the design. So I know from DG1 of the Wood Neighbour Plan talks about developments respecting the local character and the build up, and it talks about respecting heritage and local distinctiveness. And I just noticed from the site visit that we got the 3 properties on the corner, and these 2 properties seem somewhat similar in terms of like the design and the style. Could you just comment on how why it's your view that this does respect the heritage and local distinctiveness? Because my only concern, or one of my concerns anyway, is that it ends up looking a bit like a row of, you know, very similar-ish houses.
Yeah, so I think so there was quite a few appeals on this in the north, and the inspector, in allowing one of the appeals, essentially concluded that in their opinion there was a very mixed character in the area with no predominant style or anything of particular dwellings. So I don't think there's a particular character that has to be replicated, and therefore I don't think these houses being similar in appearance necessarily is harmful to that character.
Thank you so much. Councillor Bills.
I think Councillor Shaw raised a very good point about parking on the street, because that is a very, very busy road. And I was wondering, is it possible to ensure that parking for the site is on site?
So we have no powers to stop parking in the highway, but we can, as a local planning authority, but we do have, obviously we can request details of construction, traffic, etc. And that would also potentially include a drawing of the site, and they would indicate where deliveries would be made and where construction vehicles or workmen's vehicles would be parked, and therefore we could condition that should be how the site's laid out during construction. But we can't, if the workmen choose to park in the road, we can't do anything about that as a local planning authority.
Whatever we can to help.
Yeah, so we could request details of it, but in terms of actually physically stopping it, we are a bit limited.
Any further questions? in which case I'm going to call for a motion and then we can move into debate. So could I have a motion on this application? Councillor Hannaby, I think you were first.
No,
But either, whoever
I
wants
was
to go.
just going to say that I propose we accept the officers. Is that what you were going to say?
I was going to say that, yes.
Okay.
So I'm happy to second.
Okay. So we've got a recommendation to approve this application as is. Well, in the discussion and questioning, sorry.
I was going to add,
Yeah.
Sorry.
the condition of seconding was that
Yeah.
we need to consider the conditions that we've discussed.
So in summary, would you be looking at sort of parking, or a construction traffic management plan, which would cover parking during construction? I'd recommend potentially mud on the road. That's
Oh,
clear.
yes, we've had that now embedded.
And also delivery times restricted to outside peak hours. And then from also what I've heard, you're looking at an additional condition on working hours, which would exclude Saturday afternoons, Sunday and bank holiday Mondays.
And the sort of standard hours. So the standards, so I'm clear, the standards, is it sort of 8 till 6? Is that the standard?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, if we go with sort of what we consider to be standard working hours.
Yeah.
So that's 2 conditions we'd be adding to this, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that, Councillor?
No, you've stolen my thunder.
So we have an application on the
You
table.
don't mean mud on road, and I think mud on road jelly. But no, that's perfect, thank you. And I don't know if anybody else is.
Would anyone like to debate either the inclusion of these conditions or indeed the application as anything further? In which case we have an application to approve with those 2 additional conditions, and I'm going to call a vote. So all those in favour, those against, any abstentions, that's unanimous and that passes. Excellent. Thank you very much. And that just leaves me to thank all of our speakers, to thank all of our officers, and indeed to thank all of you councillors for your time this evening. And with that, I just ask to close the meeting. And Bertie, can you confirm the live stream is ended?